Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Goldster Conversation. I'm thrilled today to be talking to Poppy Lloyd, who's had a really fascinating career, what she describes as a wiggly career. So, Poppy, welcome to Goldster.
Thank you very much. Hi, Lucinda. It's lovely to be here.
So, I wanted to start off with the beginning of your career. Tell us why you had to keep getting up at 4 o'clock every morning.
So I kind of after I left university, I got well, actually during university, I got really into student radio. I studied geography at Edinburgh, but didn't kind of felt like I had a vocation in any particular area. And student radio was one of my kind of first passions at university. So after university, um, thinking life stretches before me. What am I going to do? What is my main takeaway from university? It was radio. So cut to a few years later of kind of after various work experiences and time at production companies, I found myself joining the brand new Heart Breakfast show on Heart London, just Heart London at the time, that had just launched with Jamie Theakston and Harriet Scott, and cut to kind of 4 years of getting up at 4:10. I honed it down to about 15 minutes towards the end. So alarm went off at 10 past 4. I was in the cab by 25 past 4. And then I kind of started work at 5 a.m. to be online or kind of on air from 6.
And did that affect you? I mean, do you still wake up early now? Did it make you much more productive getting up at that time, or do you now just love a lion?
Well, I've got two small children, so those kind of words don't really compute. I don't really understand what you're saying when it comes to a lion anymore. But I think some people have it in them and some people don't. I know colleagues of mine who still work in breakfast radio and have done for 10, 15 years. Their kind of rhythms have kind of adapted. I wasn't one of those people, and I reached my limit after about 4 years, and I just thought I need to, it kind of takes its toll. You feel like, and particularly because I was in my 20s, so I was burning the candle at both ends for a while, but it's like being slightly hungover fairly regularly without touching a drop. So the kind of pattern would be, you get in and you hit the ground running. You have an hour between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. until that 3-hour show went live on air when we were out to London, and then it became a network show, and you are absolutely kind of on fire. The team is there. The buzz of being in a live radio studio is wonderful. I kind of absolutely thrived on it. And then when you come off air, first thing you do is all go and get some breakfast. That's one of the kind of hell. You're so starving. You all sit down and have a big fry up or some kind of, huge breakfast to then get you through the next few hours when you're planning the next few shows. So yeah, it takes its toll, and you should go to bed earlier. You don't often, and then you're kind of catching up. But the buzz of that live studio and the things that you do as part of that show absolutely got me through.
And what do you think? What lessons do you think you took for your career or for life from that time of being on the breakfast show and having that incredible buzz all the time, that energetic feeling?
I mean, I suppose one of the things is having been lucky enough to experience that buzz, that finding a job or a kind of career that gives you those buzzes is so important. And people are kind of find their motivations in different things. For me, I'm always striving for that kind of buzz again. So I guess in one learning was that experience of that fast-paced excitement of, once those mics are up, anything could go, and you planned it to hopefully make sure that it all goes well, but sometimes live radio, they don't always. So being able to kind of think quite quickly on your feet is absolutely a skill I take from those live radio days, of being able to make a decision quite quickly. And I remember one of my fantastic exec producers at the time, a man called Jamie Scott, told me, when those mics go up, if a presenter asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you look them straight in the eye, you tell them what you think the answer is, and then you run as fast as you can out, because the last thing you want to do is breed concern or insecurity, you know, yes, Jamie, that is happening today. Run to go and find the answer. So the kind of confidence in your decision making, and then, you know, working back from there is definitely a skill I took from the live radio days as well.
That must be great training for becoming a mother as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, negotiation skills, talent management when you're dealing with presenters and high profile guests. We were an entertainment show, a kind of family entertainment show. So we're lucky enough to have some really exciting high profile guests. And so, yes, when you're kind of dealing with Mariah Carey's candle requests, it's a bit like negotiation with, no, you know, negotiating with small children. Really? Is that needed right now? In a studio? But yeah, so it was really good fun, and teamwork as well. In those high pressure environments, you're working very intensely with a group of people who you get to know in, you know, at 5 a.m. in the morning, the best and worst. So kind of really collaboration, communication, teamwork is definitely something I love in all the jobs I've done since, and absolutely my greatest training ground was that intense live radio studio and the family that we kind of built together. We were a brand new show, and over the course of those 5 years we went from being brand new to being number one, and that was you know, we shared in all of that together, and each one of us had our role that we played.
So when did you decide to leave, and what was your impetus for actually leaving radio?
Well, there were the kind of changes. I had moved from doing breakfast. I'd slightly expanded my role to also working with new presenters such as Emma Bunton, also known as Baby Spice, Jason Donovan, who were launching their own show across the Heart Network on the weekends. And I was lucky enough to launch Emma's kind of radio Saturday show. So I was beginning to kind of branch outside of the breakfast show specifically. But I was also in my 20s. I'd been there 4.5 years. I was kind of ready for a bit of a change. And well, is it a cliche? I fell in love, and my now husband at the time was also at a kind of similar stage. He'd done a fairly intense job for a few years, and we both said, now's the time to, you know, before life gets a bit more serious, let's go off and see the world. And so that was the kind of initial impetus to just put that pause, to definitely catch up on some sleep. And so off we went around the world and found ourselves in West Africa and Sierra Leone, and that then started the next chapter of my career.
And so tell us about Sierra Leone, what you did there and how important it's been for you.
So we originally we had seen in a small article in the Metro, the London kind of free daily newspaper, and had seen it on my commute home, and an article about an organization called Street Child that had set up in Sierra Leone with the prime example, with the kind of aim and ambition of getting kids off the street, reunited with their families and back into education. And we reached out to them and said, hi, do you need some help? Essentially, we're kind of here, we've got some time, we have some skills, will they be helpful? And they said, we were hugely lucky. They said, sure, come and help out for a bit, we'll work it out. And so we found ourselves in Makeni, a town in northern Sierra Leone, where we had originally said, we don't want to be a burden. Let's see, but we're here to help if you need some bodies. And what was originally meant to be 1 month turned into the best part of a year, where we stayed and worked with Street Child, and did everything from kind of logistics and just supporting on delivering programs. But really, that was kind of the skills that we tried to bring were from the kind of communications point of view, me coming from radio and my husband coming from a kind of sports PR background, but what it meant is that we were quite good at kind of words and bringing stories to life in a way that could then appeal to wider audiences. And so we worked with Street Child to develop a bit of a communication strategy that would support their fundraising back in the UK. And then also while we were there, they launched their own fundraising initiative within the town of McKenney, called the Clubhouse, which was a kind of cafe and small restaurant. And so we helped train up the staff. We'd both done plenty of hospitality over our kind of, working in bars and restaurants ourselves. And so we trained up the staff in McKenney in terms of kind of hospitalities. We ran big fundraising events to try to kind of raise some money in the community. It was brilliant. And so we were there for the best part of a year. And I guess to answer your question about how important that then became is, that I came back still with a love of radio and words and wanting to kind of communicate, but having spent that time in West Africa, thought, how can I take the experience that I've just had and continue to work with purpose? That felt really, really important, that I wanted to do something that had a purpose and gave back. And so rather than go straight back into commercial radio, I ended up working at Save the Children, kind of combining my old experience with my new experience from Sierra Leone.
So before we get on to Save the Children, I just want to say to anyone listening, the website, if you want to check out Street Child, is www.street-child.org. And it is an amazing charity, isn't it?
It's absolutely phenomenal. And the work I saw firsthand that they do in Sierra Leone is genuinely kind of makes a difference. And they have broadened out their work and kind of impact from not just working with children who have ended up on the street for various different reasons and reuniting them with their family and education, to broadening that out to more to kind of wider education projects. They're now in a number of countries, both in the African continent and broader. They've done some kind of phenomenal work in Afghanistan, for example. And Tom Dannett, who is the founder, is completely kind of an inspiration, what he's done with that organization, and hand on heart, I'm so proud to have been a part of it and continue to support them as Joe Public.
Have you had a chance to take your own children? Sorry, have you had a chance to take your own children to Sierra Leone, or do you plan to?
Absolutely plan to one day. My daughter has the middle name McKenney after kind of the town where we lived in Sierra Leone. No, not yet. We've been lucky enough to take them to Africa. They've been to Ghana and South Africa, both actually through my husband's work. He works for an organization called Global Citizen now. That's a different podcast. So we've been lucky enough to take them. I very much hope so. They were still a little bit too young to deal with malaria pills and things. So, we haven't yet, but I will absolutely, take them.
So when you came back, you decided you wanted to work for Save the Children, or was that something that just came up, or was it just that you knew you wanted to do some work with children in some capacity?
Yes, exactly. Again, back to we were talking about the wiggly career. I've always slightly envied those people who at the start of their career, or who have that vision, who have that vocation to say, yes, I want to be this person, or this is where I wanted to end up. And my career just hasn't been quite so focused, and I'm quite envious of people who do have that vision. But I knew when I came back that I wanted to combine the experience, or to build on the experience that I'd had in Sierra Leone, as well as using the skills that I had developed through my kind of time at radio. And Save the Children, I knew a friend who had done some work from them, and then introduced me to somebody. It was one of those kind of, one conversation led to another. And it was the year that London hosted the Olympics, so 2012, and they were towards the end of the Olympics, the kind of essentially the government, or the UK were handing over the Olympics to Rio. They were going, they were hosting the next. And they were also hosting a summit on hunger and what world leaders could do to essentially kind of commit kind of funding and initiatives to improve the status of kind of world hunger. And so Save the Children asked me to project manage essentially a PR stunt for a few months. That was my kind of way in to Save the Children, where we built a little Olympic racetrack outside Number 10. And we had, David Cameron was the Prime Minister at the time. We had Pele there. We had Mo Farah and a number of school children from different schools in the area. And we did a race against hunger where we handed the baton from David Cameron handed it to the Brazilian representative who was there, and as a way to kind of raise awareness about the importance of the Olympics as a stage to kind of, more than just the sport. And so I kind of project managed that PR stunt.
That must have been incredible. How long did that take to organize? And what were the nightmares?
Well, a good few months for, often, as is the case, for that one photo that then, kind of was in the paper, and we used it across all of our kind of assets for months. But yeah, a lot of months for a couple of hours of just, there's that shot in the race against hunger. And then that kind of led me into something more permanent at Save the Children, where I started off my time there as a senior campaigns advisor. And so what that meant was working really to galvanize public opinion and support and action to influence change makers. Well, create change makers to influence policy change. So we had a Save the Children's advocacy and the kind of policy and advocacy work they do to try to kind of set the groundwork for kind of fantastic decision making and leadership in this in the space of international development is absolutely phenomenal. And it was like going back to university when I first joined Save the Children. So many unbelievably smart and intelligent people who were just a kind of, and continue to be, a source of real inspiration. But my job was less on the real clever side and more about how we can kind of broaden out that awareness. How can we create a kind of groundswell of kind of support and awareness to show world leaders essentially that people want things to change. People want, people are fed up with seeing kind of children and their families suffering around the world, and we have to do more about it. So part of my job was to try to build public campaigns that would garner kind of support and action to show world leaders that they need to do something about it. So it's that kind of accountability piece from public opinion. And I was lucky enough to work as part of a kind of number of coalitions with other international development aid organizations in the space on hunger, for example, on newborn and maternal health, and did that for a number of years before I then kind of moved more into the kind of branding and communication space at Save the Children.
And what were your biggest challenges, do you think, at Save the Children, and how did you overcome them?
Wow. I mean, so many. I think one of the things that was really, well, fundraising generally is tough, and more so, none so than ever in a cost of living crisis where families are kind of struggling to make their own ends meet, to then try to kind of raise money for others, far away, is really, really hard. And whether people still kind of want to or not, but can't, it's a real challenge. So trying to kind of find new and innovative ways to inspire support. One of the kind of other challenge is around the perception of aid and international development. And one of the projects that I was involved in Save the Children when I was working on in kind of brand and the kind of brand and marketing side was how we can move away from perpetuating that negative stereotype of us and them and othering the children that Save the Children work so tirelessly to help, and how particularly in the wake of a humanitarian disaster. So one of the things I led on was a number of our humanitarian fundraising appeals. So to kind of with Afghanistan and Ukraine, for example, how we can elicit response from the public and ultimately donations to support our appeals without, as I say, perpetuating negative stereotypes of poverty. Because while it taps into a heartstring, it is not reflective of society, particularly in Africa. It is not kind of reflective of the vast majority of that continent. Is that making sense?
Yeah, no,
so
absolutely.
That kind of brand perception and trying to progress Save the Children's brand to be with children, not for children, while also recognizing, and I'm particularly talking about imagery here at the moment, how we can also cut through and get people's attention so that they do notice what's going on. And sadly, it's often those more hard-hitting images of children suffering that get people's attention. So how do we strike that balance?
Yeah, that's such a tricky
challenge
balance.
and an ongoing one.
Yeah. And so what does it show? What does the kind of research show that how people respond to harrowing images, and how can we change that mindset perhaps?
Well, it is definitely a kind of a slow burn, and I do see, and it's something that is not down to one organization like Save the Children. It's a sector-wide movement, and I kind of firmly believe that it is moving in the right direction. But it's all about, for Save the Children particularly, children's voices, and just giving children a platform for them to tell their stories, not kind of hiding away from the sadly kind of harrowing reality and harrowing experiences that many children have faced, but kind of providing that platform in a kind of clear way that then demonstrates impact, to show that through these organizations change can happen. But it's a slow burn. And the evidence shows that the appetite amongst British public is very much there. People want to see impact. They're fed up with seeing the same types of images and headlines that they saw around Live Aid, for example. And that impacts fundraising, because people said, hang on, I gave to a hunger appeal, to the Ethiopian famine appeal back then. What's changed? What's the point? Is my money going to make a difference? So there is an appetite for wanting to see impact, wanting to see progress, wanting to know that your money is investing in initiatives that will build resilience. So, for example, Save the Children have done some fantastic programming around drought-resistant crops. And that's what the kind of public fundraising helps to support. However, it's tricky to get that quite complex messaging, particularly around what's called a protracted crisis like hunger. It's not in the moment. It's not a humanitarian, an immediate humanitarian disaster. To get that across in a single image on a paid social advert. Yeah. And so what we did see is, despite lots of research that told us, yes, the public want to see that more positive imagery, that more impact-led communication, in the wake of a humanitarian disaster, those more, I guess, those more hard-hitting images are the ones that elicit more donations. So it's the balance.
There must have been a lot of times when you were working in that field that things just felt really overwhelming for you. What did you do to get yourself emotionally healthy and through those dark times?
God, that's a really good question. I mean, back to those kind of live radio days we were talking about, that buzz, and that doesn't feel like the right word to use to describe when you're talking about managing an appeal of kind of, you know, a big communications or fundraising project in the wake of a humanitarian disaster. It's not like a buzz, but when you got to do it, when time is of the essence, and when you're talking about launching a humanitarian fundraising appeal, absolutely time is critical. Getting out, getting your communications out, and letting people, building kind of awareness of what's needed is absolutely critical. And so there isn't really time to sit and reflect about the tragedy that is going on, and you're surrounded by people who are all in the same boat. And I can't, you know, I feel would feel fraudulent to even try to claim the kind of I deserved any space, when really my colleagues who were going out to war zones, out to, you know, communities where, in order to try to kind of help, they were the ones who, you know, who would be experiencing it much more. It's funny, since I've left Save the Children, I've actually found I am much more susceptible to those kinds of campaigns that I was working on more. They hit harder now that I'm a punter rather than when I'm close to the detail, because you can't, if you sat all day every day absolutely thinking about it too hard, you couldn't do your job. And we had a really important job to do, to raise awareness of these children and to try to kind of tell their stories.
I guess it's a bit like being a war correspondent. You actually can't think of the horror while you're there. You just have to do the job.
No, and I mean, I can't compare myself to a war correspondent in any way at all. But what was so interesting is I was talking to someone recently about how war correspondents, why do they go back? Why do they keep going back? And back to what we were saying originally about that buzz, it must be when you have experienced something so intense, and you then find yourself walking around Sainsbury's thinking, you know, back in normal life, you kind of strive for those normal moments afterwards. And then you think, oh, it doesn't quite give me the buzz that certain kind of professional situations do.
Yeah. That makes absolute sense. I think it's a really fascinating thing to think that you have to emotionally cut off while you're doing it in order to do the work. And if you couldn't emotionally cut off, perhaps you wouldn't be as good at getting other people to fundraise. So tell us about your wonder books. What were they?
So the next part of my kind of wiggly journey was I moved from so at Save the Children, the campaigns and the kind of public mobilization into more of the kind of brand and communication spaces we've been talking about, and how we can kind of put children's stories front and foremost in our brand and communications. And then that led me, my next kind of move at Save the Children was into a new team called Fundraising Development. And that was designed to find new and innovative ways that we could help raise money, kind of recognizing back to something we were just talking about earlier, but you know, organizations and charities can't just rely on the goodness of people's charitable kind of donations anymore, particularly in times of kind of economic crisis when people are struggling. You have to offer added value. You have to give them a reason, not just donate out of the goodness of your heart. And so part of the team that I was working in was finding ways that we could kind of ultimately raise money for Save the Children, but also doing something that showcased our brand and gave our donors something in return. And so with a kind of number of colleagues, we developed Wonder Books, which was a children's book subscription service. And in fact, there's Asif and the Songbird. I have some here. It was a series of, and it's still going. I'd highly recommend it if anyone is looking for presents for children, grandchildren, friends and family. We produced a series of 12 books, each one inspired by the real life story of a child in a different country that Save the Children had worked with in our programs. In fact, I'm not sure you can see this picture here. is of Muni, who this is kind of the real life Muni, who we met through our program in Patna in India, who was this phenomenal girl who wasn't allowed to go to school, and Save the Children worked with her and her parents to try and get her to school, and provided her with some of the kind of basic school materials, pens and pencils. And she went to school and learnt to read and did fantastically well. And then she said, how come this is not fair that just me gets to go to school? And so she set up a little school on the rooftop in her village, and she taught other women in the village to read. And then that became, so she was the inspiration behind Muni's rooftop school. And so we turned this into a kind of lovely illustrated book, telling Muni's story, aimed at children, kind of early readers, you know, kind of 7 and younger.
And if anybody would like to get hold of those, the website is www.wonderbooks.org.uk.
Thank you.
Wonder as in WONDER, not as in Wonder Brown.
Yeah. Wonder books. And so there's a series of 12, each one inspired by a kind of real life a child that Save the Children worked with, and we kind of sold it as they sell it as a subscription service. So it was my role to kind of get that out into market and to launch it, and then kind of try to scale it as a viable fundraising initiative.
And were you inspired at all by your mum's work? Because your mum was a children's publisher. Do you think that helped you come up with the idea?
Well, I can't take credit for the whole idea. I was part of the team that kind of developed the idea. But I'm sure, I mean, my mum has been and continues to be a kind of huge inspiration. Yeah, my mum, Marion Lloyd, was a great children's book editor. And so I grew up very much with books and stories and you know, always in our house, and was lucky enough to therefore kind of develop a love of reading. And I think that has flowed through into the work that I did through Wonder Books and now do at First News, that real kind of recognition of the impact that reading and reading for pleasure can have for children. And I saw so kind of much through my time at Save the Children about the impact that just learning to read and developing a love of reading can have on somebody's life chances. And so, yes, I'm sure, I know my mum's kind of work and kind of inspires me always. Yes.
So you mentioned First News. So tell everybody, what is First News before we get onto your role there?
So First News is a children's newspaper. It's been going since 2006. It's a kind of independent business that produces a weekly printed newspaper. I think that's our current issue, our 2024, looking at the year ahead. And it is a kind of fantastic weekly print newspaper. It's also available online and via our app, where we produce daily news stories that kids can interact with and vote on polls and take part. But it's a fantastic source of impartial, kind of clear, age-appropriate news for kids of all ages. Really, I think kind of perfect for kids between the ages of about 7 to 14. And they receive a weekly newspaper that covers all of the big news stories in a kind of age-appropriate way. Also covers sports and entertainment and kind of more campaign-led issues. We've just recently, for example, the end of last year, ran a campaign called Look Up, which was encouraging children and their families to understand about the importance of looking up from your phone when you're crossing the road, and particularly when it's kind of dark. And so we run campaigns within the paper. But it's just a fantastic source of information. And so I've now been at First News for just over a year.
And it sounds really interesting. I love, what kind of age group do you think they should begin reading this news?
Well, this is something that I get from my mum. I know she was always she always hated putting labels on books, because then it felt like, oh, well, I'm outside that age bracket, so it's not right for me. And what I love about First News is it's pitched about my level. a bit about, I don't sadly have the kind of time and to read, newspapers cover to cover anymore. And so First News is such a fantastic kind of bite size, like I say, they have kind of bite size headlines. I'm not sure how much you can see. And then in each issue, you've got kind of longer special features. We say perfect for 7 to kind of 14, but it entirely depends. Like I say, adults can get just as much enjoyment out of it. I'd say it's key stage 2 and key stage 3 in terms of school. And what's fantastic about First News is at the heart of First News, it's our newspaper. Like I say, we also have the online, our app, which gives you daily news and in kind of interactive features. We also produce a suite of learning resources for schools. So we kind of have about 6,000, 7,000 subscribing schools, mainly primary, but kind of about a third secondary schools as well around the UK, who each week in different formats receive news-based learning resources designed to kickstart conversations in the classroom about what's going on in the news. So this could be debates, it could be comprehensions, it could be activities, all based on what's kind of in First News that week. And it's our kind of strapline is news kids can trust, and it feels that's more important than ever. Really? That in a world of so much misinformation, and with children accessing a whole load of disinformation via all sorts of sources, TikTok and social media, which has its place, it feels like rather than try to kind of cut off information, it's really important to empower children with the right kind of information. And that's part of what First News' mission is to give all children access to information and news in a way that's right for them, so they can make sense of the world around them. And not having access to that means that they've only got things that they then see on YouTube or TikTok, which might not be correct and might only cause more anxiety, or so I'm really, really kind of proud of the mission that First News
what kind of stories do you like to have as part of First News? What kind of things do you want children to know about? Well,
I mean, anything, I think, that kind of gets them to stop and think, anything that gets them to start a conversation, ask questions, whether that be of their parents, of their teacher, of their friends. And this is why I think First News is great, because there is something for everyone, whether that be short, bite-size bits on new games coming out, to more in-depth special features. I'm really proud of the work that First News did over the last couple of months to report and reflect on what's going on in Israel and Gaza. And there are still kind of resources that we continue to update to kind of entirely impartial, that children can, and their parents and teachers can access. Because there's no doubt, if my children or anything go by, whether you try to shut off the news, and the news can be really scary. Every day we're hearing of things going on in the UK and around the world that are scary for young people. And we can do our best as parents and guardians to try to protect them and not cause overwhelm. But that doesn't mean they're not going to hear stuff from friends, from older siblings, from social media, from the playground. And that's why kind of First News is here to just reassure with the facts in a kind of impartial and age-appropriate way. So this week's issue is all about the big events coming up this year. General election, we're going to be covering lots over the course of the year, and what that actually means, and how children and young people can kind of play a part. And we will be continuing to build up on our Look Up campaign, as I mentioned, about encouraging safe use of phones.
Great idea.
Internet safety is always discussed. We did a kind of fantastic campaign last year, and we'll be continuing to do more on that this year, about the impacts of vaping, which for older children, particularly from kind of secondary school onwards, is a real concern. But we, again, back to what I was talking to about Save the Children earlier on, we do it kind of in everything we do, always try to be child-led. First News is providing a platform for children to discuss and ask questions they want to, not us doing it for them, if that makes that makes sense.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that with the timeline of your career, you have seen a huge change in the way that social media has been created and is used. How has that had an impact on your career, and where do you think the future lies with children's news with social media?
Wow, what a question. I mean, absolutely. God, I'm old enough to remember a time where, you know, before social media, before the internet. You know, I grew up without a phone, without access to the internet. I got my first Hotmail email account, which I still have, when I was in sixth form. So I think the biggest change is the access to just so much information. Children are bombarded through all sorts of sources wherever they go, you know, of information, and it's kind of cutting through and empowering them to recognize what's real, what's important, and what's not. And that will continue to be a challenge. And in fact, I'm very happy, if helpful, I will share a link after this for people to download our fake news special. We did a whole feature, a whole issue of the newspaper called Making Sense of the News, and helping children to spot fake news.
That's a great initiative.
It's a kind of fantastic piece of editorial, and we recently updated it a few months ago to include AI and things like TikTok that kind of appear. So I think that will continue to be a challenge, and I'm sure we'll see that as the kind of general election ramps up is this year. You know, it's the kind of online tactical playing off each other, and it's difficult for young people, particularly once they've got a phone and access to the internet, how you navigate that. So kind of finding our place to report on the facts in the right way will continue to be more so than ever. What was the second part of your question?
I just was wondering, really, if social media was presumably very, very useful when you were campaigning, things like Street Child and Save the Children, but what a nightmare it must be in your current work.
Well, this is why I'm lucky enough to work with brilliant people who have expertise that I do not. And that's why, but yes, it's learning a whole, you know, kind of marketing as a whole has, in terms of the skill set that 10 years ago, no, not 10 years ago, but 20 years ago, if you started in marketing, you would not need to be an expert in Facebook and Meta and digital marketing and SEO. And whereas now it's an absolute kind of essential requirement. I think social media is a fantastic platform to be able to raise awareness, to be able to kind of get your message across, and it's a powerful selling platform. We use social media to sell First News subscriptions and reach audiences. The challenge with social media is, if you are a small business, it's harder and harder to get your pound working efficiently and to cut through. You are a kind of drop in the ocean. So we are having to kind of think of, you know, new and more innovative ways to get our kind of brand out there to families who we really feel, you know, would enjoy and benefit from First News. And I'm definitely seeing a shift in the more traditional social media channels aren't doing that so effectively unless you've got big budgets now, you know.
Yeah. Do you manage to get any feedback from schools and find out how First News is affecting the way that children are discussing things at school?
Yeah, God, that's one of the biggest, joys of when you hear from children who loved the paper and got really kind of stuck into it, and then they set up a First News club, which we've now got kind of over 500 First News clubs around the country in schools, who they set it up as a kind of extracurricular club for them to kind of sit and discuss the news that week. We have such fantastic feedback from teachers who talk to us about the power of reading and how First News helps reluctant readers. So, some children are kind of passionate about reading and jump into Harry Potter and jump into Percy Jackson series and all, wonderful series of books. But not every kid gets that, and it can be overwhelming. Blooming, I just finished reading with my daughter the fourth or fifth Harry Potter. It's 800 pages long. I mean, it really can be overwhelming. And if you're a reluctant reader, that's a big kind of hurdle to climb. And so one of the consistent bits of feedback we have from teachers is how First News helps reluctant readers. They can there are bite-sized articles,
Brilliant.
more in-depth headlines in their own time that they can get stuck into, even things like crosswords. That is all building your ability for reading for pleasure. The other thing that we hear is critical thinking skills, and how helping kids kind of make sense of the news world around them through news they can trust helps to build those critical thinking skills. And it contributes to, as part of the curriculum, their citizenship and kind of PSHE curriculum. So no, we get some kind of fantastic feedback from teachers and parents, and that is incredibly inspiring and motivating.
So before we wrap up, I just wondered, with going back to your kind of early campaigning work, something I think people are really feeling now is that it is a time of poverty, not just overseas, which in the past people might have thought, but very much in this country. And that must have had a huge impact on the way that charities like Save the Children are able to raise funds. What can individuals do in a kind of time of crisis when so many parts of the world are struggling? What can they do as individuals when they feel their government isn't doing enough to address situations? Do you have any words of wisdom you can pass on from your time working in Africa or from working for Save the Children?
I mean, I think use your voice and your platform. Let your MP, find out, talk to your MP about those kind of broader issues as well. It's, the organizations, I mean, I know that I'm particularly kind of biased, but I did, I have seen it firsthand, the power that Save the Children and others have to influence leaders. They are really, organizations like Save the Children are the experts. So supporting their kind of advocacy and campaigning work, there are obviously easier things, signing up for their kind of communication, so they can kind of start telling you about where you can use your voice, whether that be from signing petitions, going and talking to your MP, and building awareness amongst your community and using that kind of groundswell of support. I also think time, but lots of people don't have time, and if they don't, being able to kind of support and donate to organizations that you are passionate about does make a difference. So back to the social media thing, that's where it can be an incredibly effective kind of platform to get conversations going. We could go deeply into the pros and cons of clicktivism, but done in a kind of effective way. Social media, using your own personal platforms to ask questions, of policymakers and change makers is really important. Old school letter writing, writing to people who have influence.
Yeah. And that's got to make an impact, hasn't it? Because people get so used to getting emails, but to get a letter must actually have a big impact now, would you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the more kind of personal and relevant you can make it. I think there was a little bit of a backlash from kind of MPs and people receiving hundreds of thousands of standard emails, all identical, which all it took for somebody was to press click, add my name, consent, yes, boom, mass mail out. That hasn't really kind of taken the time, but a personal relevant, this is how this issue is affecting me. I'm not happy about it. What are you going to do about it? Or, this is what I want to do about it. Absolutely goes a long way.
And where do you see your career going, say 20 years hence? Would you ever think of a return to radio? Could you see a connection between all the elements that you've done so far?
I was reflecting on this before we spoke. I mean, I suppose there is a golden thread of children and purpose that I hope will continue to thread through my kind of career moving forward. The next generation has to be better informed than the last, and if we're to make any kind of positive difference, so being able to do that, whether that be through fantastic stories like Wonder Books, in newspapers like First News, or some kind of new initiative, I would love to be a part of that, and to try to get the next generation talking off their screens, or using their screens in the right kind of powerful way. I'd love, radio was my first love professionally, and I still am a huge kind of radio fan. I think radio and podcasts kind of are so important and influential. So yeah, maybe one day we'll go full circle, but I'm excited. I think kind of what I feel very grateful to have had is that wiggly career, and that I've been fortunate enough to have lots of different experiences in different organizations here in the UK and around the world. And that one of my scariest bosses, when I was having a kind of little wobble of a kind of crisis of confidence, said, as long as you are learning, and as long as you have more days in the week that you enjoy coming to work than you don't, then you're doing all right. That's all you can kind of really hope for. And I've so far, for the most part, been able to learn and kind of enjoy what I'm doing, and as long as I can kind of keep doing that, then I'll be all right.
I think that's great advice. I love that. Thank you. For anyone who wants to find out more about First News, if you've got children or grandchildren, it's firstnews.co.uk. And if you join our Goldster Conversations Facebook page, we will post the link onto that Poppy is going to send. Thank you so much, Poppy. It's been absolutely wonderful having you here today. I really appreciate you making the time in such a busy career to come on and talk to us on Goldster today.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And if you wouldn't mind just bearing with me for a couple of minutes, I'm going to tell everybody what's coming up on Goldster. So on Thursday, everybody, I am going to be interviewing, I'm very excited about this, Amanda Craig. Her most recent book is The Three Graces. She's great fun. She's a wonderful author, and she's going to be a fantastic guest, I know. And I'm really excited because this one is one of our Riverstone live conversations. If you haven't already, you can apply for tickets to come. As you know, spaces are quite limited, but this will be at Riverstone, Kensington. But of course, as always, you can also attend on Zoom, and you can watch it on catch up as well. So come along as normal on Zoom, or come in person to London to meet me and Amanda having a chat about The Three Graces and all of her other work. And then on Friday, I'm back again with Rachel Trethewey, fantastic author, and I'm really enjoying her most recent book, Mothers of the Mind, about the mothers of Virginia Woolf, Agatha Christie and Sylvia Plath. It's brilliantly researched, fascinating, can't recommend it enough. And then Humphrey is back next week on Goldster Conversations with Jeff Cox on Tuesday. This is Purpose, Passion, Grit. This is basically talking about community and writing. He is BBC producer and author of West Somerset in the News, the story of a newspaper that began life in July 1860, and looking at how journalism has changed over time. And then next Thursday, we've got a community chat with me and Humphrey. So anybody who wants to come along, it's non-recorded, it's unmuted. Come and chat to us about what you want, about what you've enjoyed on Goldster, and what you want going forward. And just to mention, by the way, that this month's book of the month, Friday the 26th of January, is Pride and Prejudice, requested by Goldster members. And next month in February, our book of the month is going to be The Cuckoo in the Nest by Fran Hill, who I'm interviewing on the 1st of February. It's such a great new novel. I absolutely loved it. It was also showcased on Women's Hour, so you may have heard about it from that. Couldn't put it down. Devoured it in 2 days. Absolutely wonderful. So thank you, everybody, for coming along. And thank you so much. Suri is not on Facebook. How do I get hold of the link that Poppy is going to send? We'll make sure that you can see it on the Goldster page as well. All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care, Poppy. Have a great rest of your week. And I'll see everyone on Thursday and Friday.
Thank you.